Welcome everybody to another panel discussion here with 4 excellent guests that are going to talk about the AI blueprint, how to scale advanced analytics and AI across the organization. With me I have Sean, Maxime, Tanu, and Herman today. Please introduce yourselves. Sean?
Hi everybody, and thanks very much for joining the discussion, and Robert for hosting us. My name is Sean Lang. I'm a data strategist at Altair. Our big vision at Altair is to converge artificial intelligence with high performance computing and with simulation, and I work with a lot of our clients on that vision. On the side of that, I also have my own podcast where a lot of the speakers actually at the Data Innovation Summit will have joined me on. It's called Future Says, and I'd encourage you to check it out as well. And thanks again for joining the panel.
Excellent. Maxime?
Yeah, hi everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Maxime Allard. I'm with the IBM Data Science Elite team. I'm a squad leader and a data scientist. And what we do is we have 6 to 12 weeks projects with clients where we try to have an end-to-end POC where we develop models and deploy them to create business value across different industries. So great to be here with everybody.
Great. Tanu?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Tanu Chellam. I am VP Product at Seldon. I've also been running a consultancy on the side that does tech venture building. At Seldon, we really do machine learning operations, and it's around helping our customers scale their models and move it into production from some training or experimentation.
Cool. Herman?
I'm finally then. Herman from Grieff. I'm leading Databricks in the Nordics. Happy to be here. I haven't been on the podcast, so Sean, I'm waiting for that invitation.
Yeah.
Everyone has been on that podcast. So short about Databricks is a data and AI platform. We invented Spark and the Delta and MLflow and a lot of cool things. I think some of you are using it. And I'm leading the organization here in the Nordics. I think that's it. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but for now, I think that's good.
Excellent. All right, let's kick off this discussion a little bit. We're going to be talking about how to scale advanced analytics and AI. And I think the reason why we're talking about scaling analytics and AI is you'd be hard-pressed nowadays to find an organization that doesn't have some kind of AI initiative. And the question is where that AI initiative tends to bud from in an organization. We don't tend to see it sort of grow everywhere at the same time. And so I'd like to begin by asking you, Sean, in your experience here, what areas of businesses are the slowest to adopt AI analytics, and why do you think that is that they're that slow compared to, say, IT departments or whatnot?
I would say at Altair, the vast majority of our clients are engineering clients that design and produce different products, different physical components. When we work with them for the last couple of decades, we've always interviewed them and we've asked them where their challenges were with scaling artificial intelligence. What we quickly found out, as I'm sure everybody on the line has seen, is that they were expecting this unicorn data scientist to do absolutely everything. This person that had coding experience, this person that had mathematical experience, and this person that had domain expertise. Of course, that is very hard to come by. You do come across them people. Maybe Maxime, are you one of them? But they're very, very expensive. So they're very difficult to find. So what we at Altair always see is to scale AI, it's really about low-code solutions, no-code solutions, to put this power of artificial intelligence into the hands of the domain experts. They're the people that have learned their trade over many, many decades, but what they struggle at is the computer science part. So if you can make that part easy, then that's how you can get them involved, and that's how you can start scaling, I'd say, that artificial intelligence. So that's, I think, where we really focus is getting these domain experts to use low-code solutions to do either basic use cases. Oftentimes, we speak about data preparation, data munging, data cleansing, just getting their information into good, structured insights to be able to do either descriptive analytics, but also then to be able to find your expert data scientist to do the more higher end, the deep learning. We say you need to sort of connect, I'd say, one expert data scientist to 5, what Gartner says, citizen data scientists. And that is the way to scale it out, to do it in layers, to first maybe do a COE, to then bring the next 10 champions, to then bring the next 100 citizen data scientists that have the motivation. The 3 things you need is motivation, you need use cases, and you need training.
That's a great beginning way to start this discussion. I'm thinking, Maxime, from IBM, you guys offer also sort of services on tap as software as a services where some data science workflows are so common now that they're commoditized as services. Do you agree with Sean where it's about lowering the threshold to entry so that it's not just engineers that can take part of it? And sort of what parts of organizations do you see benefit from that?
Yeah, no, so I actually agree with a lot that Sean said, because I think one bit is the experts that you have that can write this code. And for example, like you said, we have tools like Altair, et cetera, that can help, engineer a lot of the codings where you don't, or have this no code kind of solutions. And so this helps a lot if you don't have the budget in a few business, units where you don't have these people that could immediately assist you with the first, proofs of values. But I think at the beginning of this, even more, what is more important and what is important for these business units is to have, a data governance that is in place, or to have data, because sometimes people just want, or business units want, AI or to be used, and it should be magic. And like Sean said, you need this data scientist who can do everything. But if there's no data and no good structure that we can have this organized data in, then you don't have use cases to scale across, your whole company, and even less in business units where you don't have these people. So it's really a combination, I think, of both, where you first have to go in and get your data into a common structure that could be either through, the services, the software services that we sell, where you have the, databases, et cetera, that you are ready or have in a ready form, but then you need to connect that to your platform that you then use to create these no-code solutions, or even code solutions. I mean, that depends on what you want to do, but it should be this collective data lake in a sense that you have organized and virtualized so that it can be reused. And I think then at that point, every business unit will be able to leverage some sense or some sort of data and to get some proof of value at least in, and then start going at scale.
Right. Tanu, I mean, Seldon it basically builds on.
I don't hear you.
Yeah, Robert, I think you've been muted.
I disappeared? Am I unmuted? 1, 2.
Herman, you need to answer that question.
Yeah, exactly. Robert, you're saying probably a lot of good things. So yeah, the challenge is we don't hear you. So yeah, but building on Maxime's point of view, you're absolutely correct, both of you. I fully agree with it. The challenge I can see is in many organizations is that it comes from a top down. Is there an understanding within the management? Is this a good thing or not? And of course, everyone agrees on yes, it's a good thing to be more data driven. Maybe is it linked to the activities within the organization? And there is many times I see a gap between parts of the organization. Yes, the low code, no code is yes, it's a good thing, but it needs to be linked into the management layer of the organization by selecting the right lighthouse accounts or lighthouse activities or whatever. You can argue back and forth where does an AI initiative or machine learning initiative start. It needs to be tied into some kind of business activity so you can start to calculate it on it. If you can do that, then suddenly you have the willingness to go the extra miles because there is a logic link between what you do and the outcome. So I will start in that corner, having some kind of business alignment, and then many things falls into its correct place if you have that.
That makes sense. Tanu, I was going to ask you, Seldon is, as a product, builds very much on ML ops principles that have started to become well established, at least among engineers, people that understand what sort of technical support they need in, having good ML ops practices. I'd like to hear your perspective on what parts of organizations are already sort of well aware of this and which parts of organizations are not as mature and maybe would benefit from learning more about what these modern best practices are.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking the question. So just to take a step back, Seldon does help you through the machine learning operations part, and that in itself is not always well understood. It's the intersection of DevOps, machine learning, and data science. And the way that we see it, companies that are really starting on their machine learning journey are just experimenting with a couple of ML models. They may decide that some of these need to go into production. At that point, that's when they start looking for tools like Seldon to help them to do better serving or inferencing and manage these models at scale. We see this as a graduation of maturity as it starts really there. As they move models into production, there is a need to monitor the data and the models itself, see if there's any data drift or if the model needs to be reconfigured in any form to retrain your data entirely. We offer a path to that, and that's a step up in terms of maturity again. And then the third one to us is around how many companies use that monitoring information to understand their data and why the data has changed. So for that, we see that as explainers that you can use to understand why did my data drift, or what's happened with my models. Has the performance degraded in some form, and why did that happen? So we can help to take you through that process. Essentially, to your question of what part of the process do customers and companies end up in, it really depends on how built out their machine learning infrastructure is in each of the companies. We've seen that it's not related to size of company. It's actually more about how much data and what quality of data is available for them. So they could be a startup, but have really great data from maybe being an HR software, looking at CVs, and have a really rich source of information and be doing good machine learning practices. On the other scale of the spectrum, we also see financial services and healthcare and health tech in general evolving to use the data they already have to better understand why there are changes to it. So it's not relevant whether they're big, but it's more around how much data and what quality of data there is.
That makes sense. I'd like to circle back on some things that I think were left implicit in the things you guys said, and that is whether a top-down or bottom-up approach helps scale AI across organizations. Because if we're talking about management buy-in, if we're talking about centers of excellence that already are dedicated at disseminating AI capabilities and all that kind of stuff, it sort of implies a top-down approach. And on the other hand, a lot of these things are driven by enthusiastic individuals, which is a bottom-up approach. So I'd like to hear some anecdotes from you guys on what has worked and what hasn't worked from a top-down or bottom-up perspective. Sean, what's your experience?
Yeah, so I think it's hard to say what's right, what's wrong in this case. I think there's a little bit of both, there's a little bit of give in either way, and I always say it's sort of like the nutcracker. It squeezes in both ways. I think you need a top-down sponsorship, you need a bottom-up enthusiasm, you need communication and collaboration between either way. What I find is the most optimal approach, what works the very, very best, is when it does start amongst champions, amongst people that see this potential, that have the motivation to go and to start using data science within their individual business units. They create the buzz, then the top down come along and they say, okay, these fragmented approach by these 5 or 10 or 15 individuals is unbelievably exciting, but we need to structure this so that we can scale it better. So then they create a center of excellence. Go on.
No, I was going to ask you, if this champion that you're talking about, I really like that term. Is that a data scientist or is it a business owner?
It's a business owner, we find. So it's a business owner that again, with the invention of low-code tools, and according to Gartner, over 65% of development activity by 2024 will be low-code. So we see that it is these people, they might be just using Excel, but they're trying to be data savvy in some way or another, Robert. So they are the champions, they inspire the innovation. Center of Excellence is then formed to bring that fragmented work together. They then create some sort of community between the business owners and maybe the data scientists that sit in the Center of Excellence. And then once that reaches a level of maturity, then it's then pushed back into the individual business units. These data scientists that sit in the Center of Excellence then become the financial, data evangelist or the engineering data evangelist.
Right.
That is then embedded into the business, and the Center of Excellence can stop that sort of change management process and refocus on other innovation. Data science, AI, it's the flavor du jour today, but other things are coming in the future, and that is also going to the Center of Excellence path.
Right. Maxime, in your opinion, what is the proportion of no code to code projects? I feel like that affects the amount of bottom up that you can expect. If everything needs to be high tech, it's going to be very bottom up, because that's the only thing that can decide the direction of things. But in your experience now, are customers able to have most of their projects no code and very managed by business types? Or is it maybe, how would you say that ratio is today, and where do you think it's headed? How fast?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Because the way we start the projects, just in general, is that usually we come from somebody like, so I had a client who is a data champion, like Sean described him. So a person with ideas and knows that there's, they have some data and they can do something. So this would start at let's put it a top-down approach. And we would come in for 6 weeks or 12 weeks, and we would, first do an EDA, analyze the data, then do sprints to actually develop intermediate goals that will then be adopted along the project. So you could say, there's that would be more a bottom-up approach where we develop stuff along these goal lines. And then the most important part is we have always, it's a co in the more investment project where we have SMEs, so subject matter experts from that business units that work with us along every step of the way. And this is really, really important, because that's where we are getting at this kind of mix between, low code, no code approach that they can use, the SMEs can use along the way, and also the approaches that we as data scientists can use, which are, can be pretty technical. And so I would say at the moment, it's really always a mixture, because we can develop quick EDAs, we can develop first models with, you have Auto AI to quickly, have first proof of ideas if something works with the data, etc. But then at the same time, you can have this non-technical person that knows the business very well, that can actually check these results based on the no codes, baselines, etc., and also based on visualization tools that will have to infer, sentiment, etc., in their data. So let's take a use case. We had a lot of use cases where we have a lot of text documents, and so we do a lot of natural language cleaning and processing on that, and some augmentations. But we also have tools that actually do the sentiment analysis, knowledge base graph generation, etc., automatically. And those are the tools that can be used by the clients alongside our project, where we build up more, more complex solutions with transformers, etc., that allows us to do, cool stuff like, summarization, question answering, etc., etc. So it's really, at the moment, I see it still a 50-50 kind of thing. But I think as we progress, it will go towards this no-code solutions, where the quicker you want results to show to your upper-level management, the better it is for those people. And the less they need us, the better for them, because it's still an investment on both sides. But again, I think if the data is there and it's in a nice place, we can shift towards that trend of no-code, low-code, and lead data scientists less in that sense for first POCs.
But never lose I think Herman might come in on this. I don't think it'll ever go completely low code either, or completely self-service. There's always going to be a mix.
For sure. I think. Sorry, Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, my only angle to this one is, like, I think there is, it's to simplify it a little bit too much if we're just saying top down or bottom up. It's more of a line of business type of conversation, and where you find it's almost a sales and marketing with subject matter experts around, I don't know, retail. I mean, Pandora will talk about in the event. You will hear Pandora, and Pandora is like, they was started in the sales and marketing with all their activities. You can almost like claim that was like a top down, but it's like you have a unit there that had a request from the business. Okay, we need to be better on X. And then that cascaded into the central IT where you're starting to work on the data. So that was very much of like, almost like going sideways in the organization. Somewhere where I see the like part of the challenges with it, like larger organization, is that like left hand doesn't really talk to the right hand. It's like, of course, these classical silos organization. In here, the data could potentially be a bridge between that, but also hindering the scaling, because you have data in so many silos. Everyone collect their part and not sharing it, and that needs to be addressed in one way or another.
I think one interesting aspect of what Maxime was mentioning earlier in terms of, aside from the specific ratio of top-down or bottom-up, was the notion that data or decision information can flow in both directions, right? And you tend to think of it as either the data that people on the field or maybe technicians create flows upwards, and then management makes decisions, and it only flows in one direction. And there's not so much that management has that flows back down to the users necessarily, although that's the premise behind data democratization, isn't it? Tanu, I'm wondering, from Seldon's perspective, do you have any interesting anecdotes in terms of, when we think about monitoring deployed models, maybe we think that only engineers are the ones consuming that kind of data. Can you share any examples of data going from management down to engineers, or vice versa? Would you say it's heavily biased in one direction or the other, or do both benefit from these kinds of AI scaling solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other panelists did cover most of this, but from my perspective, we've seen that actually a lot of what Sean was saying around having a data enthusiast or a champion, and that being the really driver for adoption of ML in customer sites, is what is really powerful. So we tend to do our best to find our champions at our customer sites, because that's the only way that we are able to get traction. It feels to me that the authority that used to be really top down has come down levels. So it's no longer the executive that makes the decision on whether to use a specific type of technology, but rather the teams itself have the authority and purchasing power to do that, which really means that there is a strong bottoms-up approach that is different from how it used to be. However, when we're talking about specific use cases and how a model is going to help make business decisions, I think there is that impact on the business user, and there is top-down. But it's not about the tools, it's about how to process the data and how to better understand it. That's what's coming from top-down, from our understanding.
That's interesting. I think one facet of being able to scale this to a large organization, if we're taking sort of cues from other aspects of IT that we scale out to entire organizations, is the aspect of governance. And I'm wondering, when I've been speaking to other panelists and other discussions about master data management, they're quite mature in terms of governance processes, how to approve metadata or feature generation, and how to ensure that they're approved by various business units. What is the landscape now with regards to AI models? If we regard them as just programs that have written themselves, what's the landscape like with regards to that? Is there a lot of best practice for governance on how to ensure that they're of sufficient quality, or that they're kept up to date and that kind of thing? What would you say, Sean?
Yeah, and I really like this question, and I think that's one of the biggest arguments against data democratization or low code, or empowering some of the domain experts, is, well, what happens with data governance? And you have more and more people using data in more and more use cases in more and more areas. where does the whole governance, where does the structure, where does the decentralized policies and rules come into play? And I think the important thing to remember is data democratization is not about giving everything to everybody and saying, go for it, you do your thing. It's about, giving the right information to the right people in the organization to do the right use cases at the right sort of time. So we always talk about the hub and spoke model. The spoke, of course, are these domain experts in the individual business units, either in finance or in procurement or in engineering. They're the spokes. They have the autonomy to do their own use cases with the data that they have. But then the hub is a centralized governance structure. Maybe it's in IT, maybe it's in the COE. They look after all the metadata management. They look after all of the data governance. They look after all the data cleansing. And they're the ones that pass on that cleansed information to the spokes to do their own use cases. So that is how I think you get away from data governance. It's so important, but you need to make the users, the domain experts, you need to give them as much autonomy, as much power as possible, and ensure that their focus is on doing the analytics and taking a lot of that important but more manual and more governance related work to other people that have more expertise in that area.
Right. Maxime, I'm also wondering, my personal perspective as a data scientist is that before we had mature tools for doing ML ops and DevOps, a lot of individuals saw the need for having a structure that maybe software developers have had for a long time. And, we're scrambling to pick the best tools. They picked a little bit from what web developers use. They picked, Git to try and version control their notebooks, and notebooks aren't really good for that. And, but now we're seeing more holistic solutions for all that kind of stuff. Would you say that MLOps and all that kind of stuff is in a mature state where you know what's best practice and that's not what's hindering the scalability of AI out to organizations? Or is it still a little bit, you have to lean into a vendor to give you good advice? What would you say?
I think it's still, I think an open question, especially around everything that is, pipeline developing, etc. So we are trying to, build pipelines. So we recently released Allard to build Jupyter Lab, actually pipelines that are a little bit more visual, etc. But still, I think we're still trying to find the right way of, building this whole flow with like Kubeflow, etc., where you can use this kind of pipelines and do the DevOps within containers and deploy your models within that.
Yeah.
And I think one specific point that you were also mentioning is, are we at a mature state in terms of, building these pipelines, but also at a point where we can actually, take decisions based on a given pipeline. So do we have enough information about that, about our models that we have built within that pipeline? Because that's one of the big issues I see at the moment, and I think should be a best practice from here on is, we need to build something like AI fact sheets or model cards that actually describe what is happening in that pipeline. So basically saying, all the pre-processing we do, all the post-processing we do, is there any bias? So, we have tools that monitor bias, etc., and fairness in those models, because you can have access to some data, but build a model that is completely unfair, and then give it to somebody, and it takes decisions on people's insurance claims, etc. And people don't even know that. Even the claims handler doesn't know that because he's using a black box. And so I think to make these pipelines even more of a, kind of have a state-of-the-art structure there is one is the development, but the other part is really the transparency of what is going on in that block, and build this kind of AI fact sheets. At least for me as a data scientist, I think that's always something that needs to be communicated to the users, either consumers or the clients that use it within their daily life.
Right. It just made me think of the term, I'm going to coin it right now, AI lineage. Everybody's talking about data lineage and that kind of thing, but I guess this makes me think, and a question that I'd be curious to hear your opinion on, Tanu, is do we treat models differently from other data processing steps? You could just view a model as a function that transforms the data like any other function, a sorting function or something like that. Do we treat AI and machine learning stuff differently, and should we?
We do treat them differently. I think this goes back to what Maxime was talking about with models being seen as a black box. And that's something that we're working to change to provide explanations on why certain decisions were being made. But so far, as he just said as well, we haven't done a good job of explaining why certain decisions are taken, especially to the end users who have requested them. So I think we do treat models differently from just any sort of data array. And I actually think we should, in that we should have greater understanding of what happens. It's extremely hard to build in just because especially as we have auto AI and ways for the models to build itself, it becomes harder and harder to understand why certain decisions are being made. But I think we should be asking more from how we're building out these technologies, because again, I'm just basically echoing what Maxime is saying here. But unless we understand why certain decisions are being made and what types of data is going into these models, we're never going to get better in terms of making decisions. History repeats itself because we're putting historical data into these models to get outputs and decisions for future actions. And so we're losing sight of the inherent biases that are going into the systems that we're automating. And so anything we can do to increase transparency, and you talked about data lineage and governance, those are extremely important, because the more that we understand how models work, how they made the decisions, and how the data that we put in is impacting these things, the better I think we will be as a society. Because right now, there's no way to understand why I didn't get credit for something because some model decided that based on historical trends, maybe it was my name. And we don't have that insight at the moment. And we need to build that more and more into a lot of our ML models that we're putting out there.
Right. I'm going to put a pin in that, because that's a question I want to ask all four of you one more time here. Exactly the use case for AI, which I think is precisely the kinds of problems that are too complicated to solve using expert systems, meaning the very problem definition itself precludes that we can understand how the models work. So we're going to put a pin in that one for just a moment, because I want to hear from you, Herman. I think one of the things that put Databricks on the map was that very early on, you guys started offering more services with your notebooks and more instrumentation, automation, and that kind of stuff than what was available easily through the open source world. And I think a lot of companies were trying to invent the wheel and the kind of thing that you guys offered as a part of your service. So I'm curious to hear what sort of parts of ML ops and data ops you think are very mature already, with the end goal of scaling AI across organizations, and maybe what parts are not as mature, but you think will be changing a lot in the coming years.
I mean, trying to answer that, I mean, you're absolutely correct. There is clearly a number of factors that is interesting here. I mean, like the accelerators that we are building when it comes to the notebooks, and trying to reuse some of the activities that we have been doing with others. Yeah, I think that's like key component here, and that goes back as well to the feature store and the combination of things. And I mean, all the conversation regarding how do we combining the new lake house. I think that's important. To be specific, I think I will pass it on to Sean or Tanu to answer that question. Yeah. I don't really have an insight.
Is that one of the big? Is our feature stores a mature service now? Would you say?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an evolving service. Let's put it that way. We are moving into I mean, we are existing on 3 clouds, and it's live on one of them, AWS, and it's moving now to the other clouds. So if you are on AWS, the feature store and how the data is related, you can already see that. I mean, going back to the challenge that we talked about. I mean, how do you democratize data? How do you get data out in the organization? How do you start to work on things that is linked to each other? That of course, an understanding of the data that is in there, so you don't start to multiply that data into like smaller pots, it's of course an important element. That's why the feature store and the lineage between the data is of course super central.
Right. All right. Well, let's then unpin the discussion that we just shelved here for a moment. And we have 10 minutes left, but I think this is an important question. It's one of the questions we got from the audience, is related to what I just spoke about before, which is how to give managers the right expectations so that you don't end up dying halfway across a project because you promised a lot or you promised too little and the project didn't even get started. So my question was a little bit, it's my opinion that you can do things with AI that you can't do with normal analytics, and that's one reason to treat it differently. But what is the appropriate way to communicate that to decision makers, why to treat it differently, and what to expect from this kind of stuff? What do you think, Sean?
I think how to treat it differently, I think we need to level set. I see managers all the time that start on this data-driven transformation. They cough up a little bit of budget and they expect unbelievable returns very, very quickly. And I think we need to educate them on the roadmap of when and how you can expect return on investment from these things. I think you need to demystify artificial intelligence. I think you need to relate it to the business use cases. For me, there's no such thing as an artificial intelligence use case. It is a business use case amplified by artificial intelligence. So I think that's sort of where you start. And then I think it's about expectations management and timelines. You need to have a portfolio of initiatives which features first and foremost quick wins. You just start small. You need to get results within 4 to 8 weeks. And the projects that you start with need to be feasible enough that you can get that value from. They need to be low complexity enough that you can get that value from. But they need to be high value enough, because if you're doing just basic use cases, you're never going to get that high level top-down approach buy-in for these types of use cases. So I think that's how you get managers bought in, by educating them, by bringing them along on this roadmap, by educating them on what they can expect, and by ensuring that they prioritize data investments and stick data investments in their strategic budgeting cycle. I think making that visible is really, really important. I read a book called A Data-Driven Organization recently, written by Richard Benjamin, who heads up data and AI at Telefonica. And he said that was the biggest thing for convincing managers, is that they put on day one, data is an asset. It needs to be managed like an asset, just like you manage your real estate assets, just like you manage any other asset you have.
Right. I think the point you made there about it needs to be easy, but it needs to be high value is super challenging. Maxime, in your project, I presume you're in and out, and unless you're ultra clever, and not every organization has access to a little swath of ultra clever engineers that can always solve problems at a moment's notice, presumably the fastest projects aren't necessarily the ones that will give you 50% lift on revenue. How do you tend to talk to customers when there is certainly a benefit, but it might not be 20% increased revenue? It might be a couple of percent here and there difference. How does that conversation go?
So sorry, I didn't get the whole question, but I think I guess most of it, because my connection seems to be bad at the moment.
You're good.
Okay, perfect. But basically, I think what you're saying is that, how do we convince clients that we go with during like such short projects and explain them the value of AI without creating this huge ROI use case
right.
that we try to do? Is that, yeah. And I think that's a great question, because that's what we see all the time. That's basically the story of my life at the moment. Because you want to show what can we do with AI and pipelines, basically. And so the idea is really that, again, I think it's important that we talk, with them about their ideas, etc. But then very quickly you'll see that we'll get a few data scientists from their side, if they have any, and go through the data with them and define a new use case that might be just, might not be a return of investment in terms of a more accurate model than what they are using, but maybe we can build more models at a given time frame. So an example that I have that I like to use is really, we had this big media company that was building a model for their clients, and every week or every day they were building 20 models, and so they had to feature engineer everything on that manually, etc., etc. And the idea was to show that, with the MLOps pipeline and tools like, so we use Auto AI to create new features, we can actually speed up this whole process and make it much quicker without maybe looking at the accuracy maybe at the moment. I mean, it needs to be as accurate at least or as good as what they have right now. But if you can create much more iterations of, feature engineering and model training, you can actually do more experiments on the air side and then build better models during that week. So the aspect of really, first of all, managing the expectations that you shouldn't, fix success criteria based on comparisons such as accuracy or maybe, predicting stock markets or whatever, but really about, how useful is it in terms of process within your company and how aligned, or what can we do later on with it? If we build this first pipeline and this POC that might, we can do that in 6 weeks. Imagine what you could do in the next 3 months by deploying this across, multiple business units and with the data that you have in your data lake. So yeah, these are the kinds of things we try to manage. And of course, the most important thing is to have somebody along the way all the time from their side that actually, gets insights and says whether or not this is useful for them.
I really like this direction we're going in now. Yeah, go ahead, Herman.
No, but I think it's, Maxime, you touched on an area that I really like, and that's how important it is to align the business goals and where the company is heading with the initiatives that you as a data team is doing. I mean, if you don't get that, I mean, you will lack sponsorship if you can't do the connection. And that's clear. And I mean, there is so many projects that is failing, and then you can argue, why is it failing? Why is it drifting? And what I will argue that many times where the project is failing is that it's not linked clearly to the business initiatives coming top down. And then we can always debate back and forward on, like, is it a bottom up or a top down? But it needs to be tied into the business initiative. And then you can start to do the calculation. Yeah, should we start with, I don't know, customer lifetime value, or is it like recommendation engine, or is it assortment, whatever it could be that is linked to where we are heading. But doing that connection is, if you miss that, you miss a lot of things.
It's pivotal.
I'm just going to add one more thing to that. So the way that I see it, there really is an onus on the vendor company that you're working with to tell you how much improvement it could give you so that you can make better assessments internally as you're deciding across different tools. So if a vendor company is not able to tell you how much better or how much faster or how much improvements they can offer, I think that's not the right vendor company. And so you really need to be evaluating with that lens in mind when you're looking at different tools that you want to put together for your ML journey.
I fully agree, and I think you should have a clear roadmap as well. I mean, we start here, and then what is like the logic next steps? You have almost like clusters. I mean, what could it be? Like customer segmentation with recommendation, with the customer lifetime value. That's almost like a cluster of things that this is a clear roadmap to these 3 areas. Or is it, I don't know, stock optimization, customer retention, and something else? I mean, it's almost like clustering things and then build a roadmap based on that.
We had some 2 really good insights here. I liked, Tanu, that you said that you should hold the vendors accountable, and it ties into everything being measurable. And also, Maxime, I really liked your suggestion that not everything needs to be measured in terms of lift on something that is a KPI today. Maybe, Tanu, you would agree, speed of deployment is something that people might not be measuring as a KPI today, but maybe it changes your workflow so much that benefit is so valuable. So you don't have to talk about how the AI improves your business KPIs that you're already measuring, but there could be entire other facets of your business that adopting these new technologies can help you scale your AI across your organization by improving other things than simple metrics. Maybe they can improve the way you work and that kind of thing. I think we got a bunch of very interesting tidbits in this panel discussion. It's already over, but I would like to thank all the panelists for joining and everybody for listening in. So see you on the next program. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks.
Thank you.